Yes. Every now and then when I'm doing these things for Star Trek Adventures stuff, talking about um concepts that we encounter in the show, I come across one that's just big enough to really, really heavily influence the setting and thus needs its own episode. This might be a rather long one too, because there's a lot. How do the politics of the Klingon Empire work? Well, one, the simple fact it's called an empire would seemingly require there to be an emperor, except that it's been hundreds of years since they actually had a reigning emperor. Kales was the first emperor. He was the first person to actually unite the Klingon people into a single cohesive empire. And thus, that is why he became Kales the Unforgettable. Because prior to him, they all just had the great houses fighting each over for whatever. One thing to remember here, though, is that the way the stuff shows the great houses, it makes it feel it's one of those things is like writers have no sense of scale thing because we're talking about an empire that spans hundreds of light years, controls probably 1,000 planets. Not necessarily inhabited planets. Mind you, some of them are probably just rocks that are nominally owned by Klingons. However, point remains, there are all these entire solar systems, billions of Klingons scattered throughout the Empire. And it is the great houses and the High Council that control everything. So, at one point in one of the shows, it was claimed that at that point there were a total of 24 great houses. Notice how there's not a list of 24 houses here. Yeah. Um and that is a big deal because of the fact that the shows will regularly be like, "Oh yeah, we're going to pretend to be from a great house," and oh, don't worry about the fact that this is a great house you've never heard from before. It definitely, definitely actually exists. Like Tomog. I actually opened that one already. Yeah, actually guessed right. Ha. Anyway, Janeway, as part of this bizarre killing game thing, claimed to be from House Tomog. Whereas Neelix, for his part in Killing Game, is like, nope, never heard of it. Now, here's the thing: so, a house that is legitimately a member of the High Council, uh, it is possible that individual members that are like low-ranking workers in one of the houses might not actually know the names of all of the great houses because if you never leave the solar system you're born in, why would you need to learn stuff like that? You know the name of the great house that controls the solar system you live in. Who cares about the other ones, right? So, plausible. And that is kind of compartmentalization is something that you see constantly in the show. It's like each Klingon ship in the Klingon fleet is operated by one of the houses. It's not a unified fleet where you like that works like Starfleet, where you have dozens of people from planets scattered around the Federation pulled together to work together. No, the Klingons don't do that shit. Nope, 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 nope. Cooperation between houses is a thing that happens. However, staffing a ship is whatever the house that is paying to man that ship chooses to put on it. So Let's go do an example here. Here we are. House Core. This guy, he's not the original Core. He's one of the descendants of the original Core, apparently. See, House Core is one that can trace its lineage all the way back to the emperor himself. Like one of the emperor's descendants was the first member of House Core, and that is something that is quite prestigious, or was, anyways. Apparently, all of the members of House Core that were from that lineage ended up dead, which is kind of a bummer, honestly. But that's the interesting thing, though, is that there we do actually see multiple members of House Core. Um, but if you look at expanded universe material, we have several people who are presumably members of House Core because, this is the son of the core that uh, ran into Captain Kirk and later would hang out with Dax and so on. Well, expanded material has it that he's married to Kali, who was someone who worked on board his ship. And that isn't it. One of the things I was getting at earlier is that the IKS Klothos, presumably all of the members of the crew are either part of House Core or people who work for House Core, which, it's something the Klingons do because of the fact that their politics are often the literal kind of backstabbing. So having people on board your ship that you don't trust, no thank you. And in Kali's case, she actually has pretty significant skills as a saboteur because she sabotaged Kirk's ship in a way that would have worked if not for the fact that there was a random alien who happened to have psionic powers who detected it and told Kirk what to do to fix the problem. Oh, yeah. Kali, it's easy to understand why Kor would want to marry her. She is smart and dangerous. Honorable warrior? Nah. But this is TOS Klingons. TOS Klingons didn't give a crap about the honorable warrior nonsense. And that is another interesting point. Different eras depict the concept of Klingon politics in a very different way. Which era you are working with in your story needs to be carefully considered because the Klingon political climate is not a consistent across all eras. Because prior to TOS in the Discovery era, they have the whole like competing great houses thing, but it's subtly different from in TNG because in the Discovery era, due to the fact that the great houses have been keeping technological secrets from each other, the actual tech base of each of the great houses varied significantly, and trading technology was something that was like a serious favor and not something that was considered ordinary and normal, which is why they had such a wide variety of ship designs, is that each of them designed ships according to their own individual ideas. And each of the however many great houses, I don't think 24 is a set number. I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't think the show ever explained why it had 24 as the total number. But whichever houses have enough importance in the empire to be considered great houses. And let's face it, that is highly nebulous because remember what I was saying earlier about great houses presumably controlling entire solar systems? At one point in TNG, the House of Moog was actually a legit great house. I don't personally understand this because the only person who was a legit member of the house, like an actual descendant of Moog, was Worf's brother. And due to political shenanigans, the House of Moog ends up getting dissolved, and Kern ends up becoming a part of House Nagra, and thus the House of Moog is just gone. Core mentioned that in one episode that he considered the House of Moog to be of a similar importance in historically due to also being descendants of Kahless. Interesting idea that Worf is actually a descendant of Kahless, but apparently it's true. Hmm, whatever. Anyways, this is a huge thing in Klingon politics, though, because a lot of the houses, like Mokai and um, not Takuvma, don't have that thing. See, because part of what was the selling point for Takuvma to become as powerful as he did is that he's like, you know what? If the other great houses won't take you, here, join me, and managed to collect a lot of power by having minor uh, groups that weren't affiliated with any of the great houses to join Takuvma's group to elevate the House of Takuvma to something that was actually influential enough to be a great house. A lot of the other houses that are considered great houses aren't that way because of how much financial and military might they command. Some of them are just prestigious. And I suspect that in the cases of the House of Kor and the House of Moog, that was part of their logic behind them having their position as great houses is because they were kind of sort of at that point in time honorary great houses due to having had their actual physical influence diminished over time. It's one of those things where building up a power base requires you to not do stuff like sacrifice yourselves winning a war to enhance the glory of the empire. And then you have the House of Duras, who literally just sold out their neighbors to the Romulans. I mean, that's actually a large part of how House Duras became as powerful as he did. He was a Romulan collaborator. That's what made him as powerful as he was. And this also goes into the whole thing of Klingon politics being in some eras, they go with the idea of honorable whatever stuff. Some eras they don't. And even in the eras where they do ostensibly go with the whole like honor duels and stuff, it's a bit debatable as to how much what's the best way to put this? Genuine reverence the people acting out the honor duels actually have for the rule of the duel. Like the House of Mokai, they're known for being sneaky, backstabbing, whatevers. Thing is, the House of Mokai has been around for quite a while, a long time, long enough that at one point in time they were considered to have been wiped out. Then nope, nope. Turns out they were just waiting or something. Interestingly, the House of Mokai. the first mention of the House of Mokai was actually in Star Trek Voyager because it's one of the things that got brought up as the name of a Klingon house in the Killing Game. Because the Killing Game is something that was, as one of the Hirogen holodeck simulations, the Killing Game had people acting out a conflict between Klingon great houses. Which, yeah, that got weird. Anyway, though, especially since none of them were actually Klingons. Well, most of them weren't. But that gave us the names of several houses that we hadn't seen. Another thing that's interesting is each of the houses has a logo. And much like the name of the house, the logo is chosen by the current leader of the house. In the case of the House of Martok, he decided that he wants it to be named Martok. And did he actually name the house after himself? Or was he simply inheriting the name of the house? Well, Martok isn't actually one of the houses that has been nobility for a long time. Kor and Moog, old school nobility. Martok isn't. He became a powerful and respected house by being a war hero. The members of the house fought with, courage and honor in war and thus gained great notoriety and not just physical influence, but political influence as well. And that's one of the things that's interesting is that Martok, because of the fact that he's not nobility, he takes a very no nonsense approach to politics. He's like, "Oh, you want me to do X, Y, and Z because it's an agreement that one of your distant ancestors made with one of my distant ancestors, and you want me to keep doing that for because you'll, help me out, but with other favors later on down the road." No. Yeah, Martok really, really was one of those guys who hated the backstabbing aspect of Klingon politics. Utterly hated it. And there's a interesting list of members because several of the members of House Martok are not actually Klingons. And this is another point. Great houses are political institutions. They are not actually families. It's not actually the same as being part of a family lineage or clan. It's a political institution that has the origination of a clan, but it has become something else over time. Although, arguably, it was the clan lineage that drew the political boundaries in the first place. So, the way it has become, though, it's all a bunch of political nonsense. And some of the houses seem to have more of a symbolic importance than a material importance. But, Martok had a material importance. It rose to prominence by being war heroes. And that's what gave them the draw to have people like Dax, Jeremy Astor of all people, and Alexander Rozhenko join them. Even Worf did. I mean, when the House of Moog was officially declared defunct, Worf chose to join the House of Martok. And that's another interesting thing. Um, the actual leadership of houses, the number of Klingons that are the actual um not the workers that are working for a house, but the actual people who are in charge of the house and define the house's identity. Um, Not all houses have a significant number of them. In the case of the House of Moog, in TNG and DS9, there was several people who were members of the House of Moog. However, that was a single digit number. At no point in TNG and DS9 was the actual number of members high enough. Because, like, you have Moog as the ancestor, but he's dead. Worf and his son Alexander, Kern, Worf's brother, Jeremy Astor, who was a human who joined the House of Moog so that he could have a feeling of family because he was an orphan and wanted to be adopted into a family so he would feel like he belonged somewhere. And oh wait, no, Worf sent him back to Earth, and he was never seen again. Presumably, I don't know what he did, quite frankly. He also somehow ended up being part of House Martok later. I'm not entirely sure why. Also, presumably, Deanna Troy, when in that alternate timeline when she married Worf and their two children, were also members of the House of Moog. There's also there's the character of Colonel Worf from the TOS movies, who is canonically Worf's ancestor. Okay, a different character named Worf who passed down his name to the Worf that we know. Um, it's never specifically stated whether he was a member of the House of Moog because the character Colonel Worf predated the existence of the House of Moog. Yeah. Remember what I was saying about the whole thing? I was like, it's not entirely clear if Kali is a member of the House of Kor or the, crew of Kor's ship or members of the House of Kor, because at no point in any of the episodes involving Kor, Kali, and the IKS Klothos in TOS era did they ever talk about houses because that plot point didn't exist in TOS. They just had Klingons doing Klingon things for Klingon reasons. However, TOS Klingons did have very compartmentalized politics. They didn't really talk about the big picture of it, though, but they made it clear that the Klingons had compartmentalized politics, and being associated with a particular captain meant you were loyal to that captain, and other ships, not so much. Again, it's not something that came up often enough for us to have a good grasp on it, though. Anyway, though, also there's the characters of Kalest and Kimtar, who were actual people who had something to do with the House of Moog. We don't know if they're proper members of the House of Moog or just servants. Something like that, though. Okay then. So, what else we got here? So, when writing things involving Klingon houses, you have the option to use a minor house because, as mentioned here, Martok was a minor house until they became war heroes and thus recognized as uh, having power and influence in the Empire. Also, it was Martok personally who led his house to glory. Prior to Martok, the house wasn't that powerful at all. So he didn't inherit his power from his ancestors. Nope. He inherited his name from his ancestors, and that's about it. Which is part of the reason why it's named House of Martok, I guess, is that he made it what it is, so it's named after him. Then Katomag. We literally don't know anything about these. We don't even know if it's actually a real house name. The best guess is that it is actually the name of a real Klingon house, but we have no information other than it's probably real. House of Korath. Again, so a house that was seen very, very little. Janeway made a deal with someone in House Korath to get a piece of exotic tech that she needed to do a time travel stunt. That's literally the only thing. Also, Korath did not have a seat on the High Council prior to that deal with Janeway. And part of the reason for making the deal in the first place was to increase the political standing of House Korath. So that calls into question how great House Korath actually was prior to making a deal with Janeway. I already talked about her in House Core. It's a weird story, though, because of the fact that, again, everything related to the existence of a House of Core is retcons. It's something that got brought up in DS9 and, when Core showed up on DS9 as part of that whole revenge plot against the albino. Prior to that episode mentioning the albino, the House of Core was never talked about at all. So, yeah. House logo, we don't have that. Hmm. But that is actually an interesting thing, though, is that when you are deciding you are going to have a house written, well, feel free to make up a logo because, like, the logos that we do have for the members of the various great houses are pretty heavily varied. Like the one for House Moog is apparently this thing. Looks kind of like an hourglass shape. What is the actual significance behind this symbol? I don't believe they've ever explained why the symbols of the great houses look the way they do. Which, fits with the idea that someone in the house basically just made something up. And it's like, hey, here's our symbol. Did it have meaning to the person who created it? Perhaps. Was it something that others would consider to have significance and proper meaning? Not necessarily. Also, I just realized something. These are the same sonic screwdriver like tools that Miles O'Brien wears as part of his Federation uniform. Ah, well. Yeah, we never actually saw any real members of House Kanja. As far as I know, the real Payhash was never seen. Yeah, it's an alias used by Miles O'Brien pretending to be a Klingon, and that was it. Oh, and the fake Martok is like, hey, wait a second, you look familiar. Yeah. Komini is someone who doesn't normally wear makeup. Yeah, okay, that tracks. Anyways, though, so House of Grilka. This is one of the examples we have in universe of a house being renamed. Um, because this was at one point in time the House of Kozak until he died, and then it got taken over by Quark, who was a Ferengi, and got renamed the House of Quark because Quark is an egomaniac like that. And then it got named the House of Grilka to let everyone know that Grilka's in charge now. Which, to be quite honest, having it get renamed to the House of Quark, I would, rename it myself, honestly. Especially to, let everyone know that Quark's not in charge anymore. Anyways, this is another one because, like, Worf isn't the only character in Star Trek to be a member of a great house to get discommendation. Gore did too, who was someone who actually genuinely deserved it. See, the House Kozak had been sworn enemies of the House of Dagor for 7 generations, blah, 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 blah. That's the reason why Kozak ended up dead. Now, this is the interesting thing that I find about this is that Dagor had decided that his best option was that instead of walking up to the front door and just straight up murdering House uh, Kozak, as it was called at the time, he was going to ruin their finances so that they would run out of money. It's a very Ferengi thing to do. It really is. And this gets good to the whole idea of like Klingon politics isn't as straightforward as a lot of people want it to be. Worf is very much in the camp of Klingons should be honorable warriors. Guys like the Gore aren't. And that was apparently a major recurring plot point with the House of Dagor is that they were underhanded jerks. Eh, Thing is, though, is that they were a long-standing house. We don't really know exactly how this house came to be, but we do know that in Discovery era they were a major uh, player. Now, this says here reduced to dishonorably feuding with, but my understanding is that at that point they were basically just like not like directly physically confronting them. And while it was considered dishonorable by some Klingons, it did give them the ability to basically just like slap House Kozak off the map. And of course, kill Kozak himself. It doesn't actually tell us anything about the political clout that De Gore had at the time. However, he did get a discommendation for it. So, oh, this is interesting. It does actually state here that they had lost their seat on the High Council prior to De Gore being discommendated. Oh, right, 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 right. De Gore killing off Kozak was a move trying to increase his political standing. So he was hoping to reclaim a seat on the council, which he failed because he got discommendated. Okay, then. Yeah. Then we have several houses that we know existed, but they weren't actually named. The Chalk. He was a member of one of the great houses. Which one? I don't know. But as mentioned before, there's 24 great houses known to have existed at one point in time. That number 24 probably doesn't actually include all of the ones that are listed here. Even if you can consider the fact that some of these have been renamed, um, it's, not, um, some of these houses weren't great houses until DS9 era. Like the House of Martok. Martok, who was one of the most influential Klingon generals in DS9 era, was the originator of the name House of Martok. Prior to that, it wasn't a great house. So that figure of 24 great houses didn't include the House of Martok. And several of these, we don't know enough about them to know anything about their origin. Like House of Grilka, um, we don't really know how old that house was. Whatever house Dechok is part of could be one of the really old ones, might not be. Don't know, and so on. House of Entok. Now, this is an interesting one because this is one that was brought up in Star Trek Enterprise in a single episode, Divergence. Although Glenn Hetrick claimed that one of the Star Trek Discovery characters was a member of House Antak, that wasn't mentioned on screen, and I don't know which one. However, the idea that House Antak was still around in Discovery era makes perfect sense. So it being one of the 24, probably. All we know is that this one guy who's a doctor named Antak. It. Oh, right. That's probably the reason for it. Is that he was disowned by his father for wanting to be a doctor. However, why does he have the name Antak? If when he's of House Antak? Oh yeah, that's right. His doctor named him after the ancestral patriarch of the house, hoping that he would become the next leader of the House Antak. And he chose not to. And then he got disowned for it. Well, that makes sense. Anyways, only other one we have left to look at is Duras. Duras is one of the houses that we've seen the most. In fact, this version of the logo of the house Duras is special because the, the Duras sisters talk about in one episode, like, oh, hey, that's what this, and this. Each of these symbols on the house logo has a specific meaning, and she mentions that the version of the seal of the house of Darash she was holding lists more individuals as members of the house of Daras than actually existed at the time, and thus, well, see, she was pregnant with child, in that the logo she was looking at had a symbol as part of the logo for her unborn child. I'm not sure if that's this one though, but yeah, Duras were sneaky so and so's, and the weird part is that Grilka and or not Grilka, Lursa and Beetor were actually the more sane members of the House of Duras. Duras himself and several of the others were just "Meh." Let's see here. Tyrell attempted to take over the empire and become emperor, actually, but that didn't work. And oh yeah, also it's like, did Worf kill Tyrell? We don't know. Status of Lursa's son, we don't know. We do know that Lursa got killed when her ship exploded, but also, did Be'etor have any children? We don't know. That's actually something that you could do, though, is if you are introducing characters as members of a great house, you can just say, this is the son of someone who we saw on screen for 5 minutes, who isn't known to have children, but never talked about their family. So we genuinely have no idea whether they have any children or not. And I think I'm going to call it here. This has gone on long enough, and the nature of various Klingon houses is unique to the individual houses. And the Star Trek setting, as much as it has investigated the nature of the various houses, hasn't actually charted them. Like, the best we have is like half of them, maybe. And that's it. So making up a new one, like, we know that there's was a group of Klingons who specialized in dilithium mining at some point in the past. Was that, a dilithium mining operation that was uh, run by one of the great houses? Presumably. I mean, A moon where you mine dilithium makes sense as a sort of thing where one house would control it, and only one, because this is the house that owns that solar system. Therefore, they control the moon, and so on and so forth. Also, the references to houses directly fighting each other, like, Mortal Kombat, fight to the death for control of the Empire thing. That, while talked about on multiple occasions, doesn't actually seem to be something that happens on a regular basis. And this is one of those weird paradoxes in Klingon logic because of the fact that they never actually say how often stuff like that happens. They just act like it's normal instead of telling us. They just imply it. Well, that leaves you room to make up whatever you want. It is, however, known that, murdering your enemies isn't actually something that happens regularly enough that people are going to consider it an everyday occurrence. Let's put it that way. Alrighty. Well, I'm calling it here. See you guys later.